Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Friday. We're going to do some motion design makeover here on Behance Live. Thank you for joining us. I'm Evan Abrams, and I'm here to take us through some really brand-driven motion graphics. Hopefully you're hanging out with us here in the Behance Live chat. If you're joining us on YouTube, then maybe transfer on over there so I can see the things that you're typing away. Throughout this process, what we're going to be doing is looking at some brands that could maybe use a little bit of motion, bit of motion love to their current graphic design process. So this week, we're going to be looking at a nonprofit from the Bay Area, taking a look at their current logo situation, and then trying to make that move. So, like I said, jump into the chat and join us on this adventure. We'll be using Illustrator, After Effects, moving things around, and hopefully by the end, having a nice logo we can all look at. So without too much further ado, I've got the Behance chat open in front of me here. So if there's anything that you want to get to me, you send it there. But in the meantime, let's just open up the screen here and get a look at what we're doing. So this week, we are going to be having a look at 826 National. 826 National are a literary nonprofit, and they do a lot of good work with creative writing, specifically empowering youth creative writing. And taking a look through their stuff, if we pretend like they're a client coming to us for motion design, then we need to assess where their brand is at currently. And then we're going to look at strategies and what is going to actively help people out. What can we actually move around to make things happen? So they were gracious enough to send along their logo, which is fantastic. Here's how most logos come to us. We're about to be doing some motion design, and wouldn't you know it, it is not in an ideal format, but we're going to struggle through that and figure out what the best way is to actually animate this thing. So with all of that in mind, what are we really looking at here? We have to first assess what these people are all about, where are they going to be using these materials, and how we want to make use of them. So make sure I have chat open here in front of me so that I can get all of your wonderful comments coming in. And it would be great if y'all could just let me know who you are, where you're from, and what you're doing in motion design. All right, and here we are. So the first thing we want to do is start assessing how we want to bring these elements on. If this is a logo and we're going to use it, say, in some video work, we need to think about the context in which we're going to deploy this logo. So right off the jump, I like to start looking at how people are currently using their logo marks in video. So here we have, they seem to repurpose a little bit of it down here for a kind of lower third at the moment. But really at the end of this video is where my heart goes out to people, where we have at the end of a video, we're just fading to the logo. And, a nice dip to white is okay, but I think we can do much better. In fact, I know we can. So what we're going to do is try to elevate what we're seeing here and have it in keeping with their current brand guidelines. Ideally, a brand is able to send those to you. So for those of you who may not be aware, brand guidelines are sort of a document that will take you through what a brand is about, how they speak to their audience, and all the technical bits of like colors and logo usage. So let's have a look at the brand guide of 826 National. Now, I know we said we'd be using Illustrator and After Effects, but wouldn't you know it, we've got Acrobat Pro getting a little bit of love today as well. This is the brand book of 826 National. And at any point, if you're going to be doing very branded work, I'm going to highly recommend that you get in here and have a look at what people are currently saying about their brand. And also, I want to say a big hello to everyone in the chat there. We've got Lindsay Palmer, good to see you. We've got Kara Butler. We've got people from all over the world here. We've got Mexico City, we've got Istanbul, we've got Tehran. So it's so great to see all these people out there. Oh, hey, Kendall, how's it going? So good to see everybody out in the chat. So this is the brand book of 826 National. In here, we can understand what they're all about, not only from a graphical perspective, but the history of a brand, what their mission is. And these things, I think, are very important when understanding the character of what we're going to do. So in motion design, we can do just about anything. We can animate these parts on in any way that we want. But what we choose to do is very critical. So, for example, we can see here the technical ways in which they represent their logo and what they do with it. And we see we've got the primary logo, the basic logo, and we can see that any animation we do to this primary logo has to work for all the other forms of that logo, right? So if we start doing really, really fancy work with it, the 826, we would probably want to remain consistent throughout all of its iterations and all of the ways it gets used. So that's a big consideration when you're thinking about this stuff. The other thing you want to think about is how is this actually deployed? And as you can see, the acceptable ways to use it are as it appears, and then inverted, and then using that white space over top of other colors. So that's going to set up some other rules that we have to play with. A brand guide is like some rules that are going to help constrain some of what we want to do. But we're looking at this thing. This is a writing nonprofit. I guess logically we should be using some kind of write-on techniques. Maybe let's think about that. Put that on the back shelf just for now. There's going to be a lot of book puns in here, so don't get too dog-eared about it. Now, when we start looking at how this brand communicates, it's very useful to look at things like their voice. So I love that 826 National, as the brand that we're kicking this off with, has this stuff, this kind of brand voice. So when we're doing that litmus test of what are we doing with their logo, remember that we want to keep it joyful, optimistic, strong, and a little bit weird, which I love. I love that we're able to look at these things and we can really understand when we think about things from the client perspective, what is joyful, what is strong, what is optimistic, and what is a little bit weird. So let's keep those ideas front of mind as we move forward. All right. As well, something else that I really want to focus in on here is their core values. And specifically because they show their core values as icons. And we can see that there is a lot of circular forms, a lot of shape. We have this line around the outside we see repeated twice, which is also similar to what we were going to find in their logo. If we go back to their original asset, all right, we got circles. We have this line circle around here. Okay. Maybe there are elements of these core values that we can bring into our animation. So, with that in mind, we should probably start preparing the artwork and start considering what we're going to do. So here in Illustrator, this is usually how a logo will come to you. Someone has generally made this for print, and we're going to take this and transpose it into some kind of moving situation. And right now, if we just twirl in, let's twirl into the layers here, and you can see just a heap of compound paths hanging out. Just everything's kind of disorganized because this has not been made for our uses. We're going to need to repurpose this based on what we think we're going to do. All right. So for example, maybe, I don't know, if you basically everybody in the chat, I'd like you all to think like producers a little bit. If you have any suggestions for how things should be moving, how you might do this, you let me know because, I'd love to see what everyone's take is. For me, I think I have to do something with this variable width font up here. I got to do something like a write-on, a nice smooth write-on with that. I think would be very nice. I think that's a little bit playful. I think I want to do something with this line around the outside. I think I want that to come on like that's being written on, but I want it to be in keeping with maybe this kind of a shape here from the "you are welcome" here, core value. This idea of welcoming, I think, is very important. So I think we want to capture that kind of movement. And then I think what we want to do is something kind of bouncy and fun. maybe with the text, keeping in mind that we don't want to get too crazy with this because as it's going to be used, it doesn't need to be distracting, right? And yes, Kathleen, good to see you here. Raymondo, good to see you here. Oh, make the number a character, Raymondo is saying. That's very interesting. So we could definitely do something kind of character-y with these. We definitely want things to have character, right? I think that's very important. When we think about motion, we think about what the character of motion is. Things can be robotic, they can be organic. So we have a few challenges, and I think we want to always start by dividing things up into their component parts so we can kind of get a better look at them. So I think I'm going to start by creating new layers and just pushing things onto their separate layers. I'm going to recommend everybody do this as you start messing around with logos and design assets and just start breaking them out, figuring out what you think goes in front of other things, playing with positive and negative space. One of the really interesting things to deal with here is going to be dealing with compound paths, which is something that After Effects doesn't do well, but Illustrator does very well. So trying to reconcile those two things may be difficult. But let's get these things onto different layers and start moving them around. Like we'd want to put 826 on its own thing. We would probably want national to be up on its own thing so that when we import this into After Effects, everything's going to be nice and organized. We don't want to have things kind of go all crazy. Kendall's saying, can things write on with a pencil or a pen? So definitely a good way to think about it. What's really neat about some of these logos is, we could definitely go for an obvious thing like a pencil is just going to shade this whole thing in. That could be a way to go. Personally, I want to keep it a little bit clean. I want to try to keep it as clean as possible and always to reduce the number of extemporaneous or extra elements that I'm bringing into play. I want to make sure that I'm not over adding to these things, but definitely we can always bring in external things and bring that stuff in. So we're getting things separated out. I'm going to go a little bit cooking show here and show you how I've broken this thing down already. Notice that I've made quite a mess of layers out here. Jason's asking, do we need to name the layers in a particular way? Name them in a way that makes sense to you, that you're going to remember and that will make almost intuitive sense to not only you, but anyone else who would open the file. That's my advice on naming. And naming them for content, I think, is what you want to do. So for example, I've got here the 826 breakdown, I call it. So since I know I want to do a kind of flourishing, kind of right-on situation, then I've broken down this shape into overlapping segments. Now, wait a minute, Evan, where are you doing that? Aren't we just going to animate some paths and have a good time? Well, that starts to get a little bit complex inside of After Effects. When you start to have overlapping sections, life gets a little bit more complicated. So by taking your original shape and breaking it into more manageable chunks, overlapping segments are going to become a lot easier for us to deal with. We don't have to do anything to the two because that's just how the two goes. We could probably bring this on with a path, but already you want to start planning how you're going to attack these things. How are we going to deal with these? So if you're wondering, hey, how do we break up this 8 into this kind of a shape? Well, the way we would typically make such a thing go, let me just start messing around with this, switch our colors out here so we can get a better look. Ungroup this a whole bunch of times because everybody likes to make groups for some reason. We can take an 8, for example, and we can start drawing these little lines on here. So I'm just going to grab the line tool and I'm just connecting anchor point to anchor point like that. Haha. And then kind of making sure that these little things are snapping to their constituent anchor points. So what we can do here is maybe we draw another line just straight down the middle like this, select all of this stuff, and then we are going to use, I like to go Shift M to grab my shape builder, and then I stick these two shapes together. So you're just going to grab here, click, drag. Now you've made those shapes together. And now we can take this shape and we can kind of break it out Say, like, excuse me, shape, you're isolated now. What do you think about that? And now we can kind of just move this back into place, snapping things around. But that's a very quick way to break out all the shapes you want. Now, I think it's pretty critical to always think in terms of where things are going to be going. So in this case, breaking these two shapes apart, I've kind of decided that I'm probably going to be writing it on from like down here, up and around, and then connecting back to where it started. It's one way to go. Otherwise, you'd want to think about different orientations of the shape. But hopefully that helps you in carving up your shapes. The 6 over here is a little bit, we had to draw a bit of this little flange here, or this little extra bit to make up for this part, because I'm planning to have this right on from the inside and out. That's kind of my idea there, because I feel like the flow from this is going to go from the 8, whoosh, from the 8, then into the 2, and then coming off the tip of the 2, over onto the 6, and then we should be done. Okay, so that should do it. Definitely a good way to go. Everything else in here, I think we're going to make those a little bit more basic. So I'm going to leave national as a bunch of shapes. I don't think I want to toy around with that too much. But when we get into After Effects, we'll think about what we want to do with that. The other thing that frustrates me to no end on logo work is when something that is so obviously visually a stroke has been converted into a fill. Ooh, oh boy, happens to us all. Could have been left as a stroke, but we didn't. So there is a little trick to extracting the midline of this stroke, if you'd really like to. If you already know what it is, call it out in the chat. But there is like a 1-minute delay, so it's going to be difficult to beat me to the punch on this. What I like to do is first take this thing, always put things on new layers so we can isolate them. I like to switch the fill for a stroke. Nice. And then what we're going to do is we are going to ungroup as many times as it requires, release the compound path, which gives us 2 separate, unique paths to deal with. And then we are going to take these, we're going to go make it a blend. So we go to Object, Blend, Make Blend. Then we go Object, Blend, Expand Blend. So even if this is a complex line, a very complex kind of shape, it could be an S, a bunch of curves, this gives you the midpoint of that line because it's trying to create a shape that is halfway between both of them. And ideally, if both of these things are using the same number of points and the shapes all make sense, you're going to end up with this line that's in the middle. Just ungroup that a bunch of times, and then we just expand out that stroke until it happens to fill up all the space that we want. Certain things can get in the way and things can get wacky from time to time, but that is my preferred method for extracting that midline. And now, whoa, bringing my windows everywhere. And then once we have this stroke, it's going to be a lot easier for us to use like a trim paths to just make that come on. It's going to be super good. So without further ado, I think we've created enough assets. Just remember that when you're confronted with existing assets, take the time to break them down, really understand what you want from them, where you want to go. So that's kind of my spiel on that. So let's open up After Effects. My interface here is a little bit stripped down. I'm kind of throwing away all the things that I don't really want to get into right now. But we've got a composition out here. Let's start bringing in our assets. You can always simply just import your .ai file. One thing I will say is please do not bring in EPS files necessarily. Save them as .ais and make your life a little bit easier. Anytime you're importing .ais, it's going to ask you if you'd like to bring in it as footage or composition. Composition is what we'd like. And we can go with layer size or document size. In this case, we're going to go layer size because we're going to be moving things around and we're going to be, things shouldn't shift around too much. Because this is a very locked branded asset, we don't anticipate a lot of alterations to it. And because we've broken it up already ahead of time, I think we're pretty safe to do that. So this is one way of importing the stuff how we would like. we end up with all of the layers just how we named them in our previous application there in Illustrator. And the ones that we weren't looking at, we're not looking at now, the ones that have the eyeball on, so you can turn them on and off, and that's all good stuff. So that's one way to do it, I'll say. I much prefer using a little plugin called Overlord. This is maybe one of my favorite little bits of secret sauce that I highly recommend people get into. If you're not familiar with Overlord, this is a great piece of kit from Adam Plouffe, and it really helps to bring things in. So I'm going to show you how that goes down real quick here. You can just select a number of paths. I'm going to ask for them to explode when they get inside. Pretty fun. And then you can start pushing assets from one to the other. So you'll notice it has exploded those two into separate layers, and they remain where they are relative to the artboard. You have a bunch of options in here, but this is a great way to start bringing things in. So I'm just going to go ahead and push those in. Whoop! Fun stuff. The only problem is that the naming convention kind of gets broken in here. You can see some of the names are good, but some of them are not. You'll notice that I am not so interested in the colors of things. That is because we are going to do a little trick at the end to make sure that we are able to make things happen in the way that their brand book has requested, so that we can make things be red and white, or white and nothing, or see-through. We want to try to touch all the bases with that. So how are we going to draw this bad boy on? Well, one thing I would recommend doing is let's bring on all of our assets first. Let's try to get through all that so that we can later get into the rest of the stuff. So let's push these bad boys on. As things are coming on, I'm going to really recommend that you change their color into groups that make sense, and that you get them into an order that kind of makes sense. And I like to use green for background elements because the grass is green, and that makes sense in my head. But so we've got these numbers. These can all remain the same color. I think that's great. Now we're going to get into things that need to be grouped together or not, depending on how you feel about them. So let's bring in national. So you'll notice that national has made a whole bunch of layers. I'm going to pre-compose those. Call this national, to try to keep all of that nice and organized. Because if we start doing little per character animations in here, we want to keep them separated, keep our lives in order. And then I think, because these things, these writing, publishing, tutoring, are we going to actually animate them on a per character stuff? So tough to say. I'm going to say no, because we only have so much time here today. So let's push that in. So you'll notice I've unclicked this little explosion, but now writing is its own separate thing. Now let's go grab publishing. If you want to select everything that's on a Illustrator layer, click this little box next to it. I don't know if you can zoom in and see what that's all about, but you can just click this little box, selects everything, boop, pushing that in. And now we're going to get tutoring, pushing that in. Nice. So I think these can all be fuchsia because they all kind of have the same hierarchy, visual hierarchy. So now we're going to push this shape in. Boom. Good. So here's our component parts. Good stuff. And let's start animating some of them. All of these letter parts, these components, I think we can go ahead and pre-compose those. I think they're going to be isolated, not touching anything else. So I'll call this 826 grouped. Wonderful. Now we're going to go to 826 grouped, and how about we figure out a way to bring this stuff on? Actually, you know what? I take it back. I don't think that was necessary at all. Let's go back here, and what I'd love to do, we're looking at things pretty small right now. So I'm going to go new null object, stick this at the bottom. One of the big disparities between print things and video things is that in print, if you have an EPS or similar, those things can be infinitely scaled at the printer. Here, we need them to have a certain pixel size. You'll notice this pixel size, very small. So let's take everything, and for now, we're going to parent it all to this null. And let's scale this up by a nice normal number. Boom, like that. Oh, wait a minute. Why is the word national all nasty now? Well, we have to turn on collapse transformations, continuous rasterization. This little switch here, if you end up with nasty vector objects, you go ahead and click that and you'll feel better. So just clicking that on and off because that's going to preserve all that stuff. Okay. 826. Let's deal with you now. We've given you enough time to think about what you've done with your life. So 826. How are we going to write this on? I want to do a fairly complex write on, but I don't want to start working until I understand the timing that we're going to get into. Anyone out there in the chat, you let me know if you've ever had trouble doing write-on techniques with variable width fonts. Happens to me all the time. And also, I will say, if you're watching this on the YouTube, why don't you come on over and join us on Behance. That's where the party's at. That's where all the people are hanging out. It's where I can also read comments and questions. So if at any point you have any quandaries, you let me know and we'll get to it. So 826, I've already decided that I would like to animate this on swirling. Let's see, let's go from the top down to the bottom. And I don't really understand the timing I'm going to use yet. I don't know. I'm figuring it out. We're doing it live. So with nothing selected, I got my pen tool, and I'm just going to draw. We don't really need a fill on what we're doing here. Here we go. And we are going to just simply start drawing a rough shape. This doesn't have to mean anything. This isn't going to be important. Just make sure that it has roughly the amount of length and distance that you want this thing to have. All right, so there we go. Coming through the middle, coming up the side, and closing it off. Boom. Okay. Normally, if this was a mono width kind of font, if it had very little variation between the thick points and the thin points, we might even use this kind of figure eight to just use it as an alpha matte for another layer. Totally doable. But in this case, because things get fat and thin and it's all over the place, I'll say thick and thin because I don't want to judge this font. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to use this, add a trim paths, twirl into the trim paths really quickly. We're just going to animate the end percentage, and it will go from 0 at the beginning to 100%. It's going to animate all the way on. And we're just going to observe this and figure out how we feel about how that comes on. We're going to imagine in our mind, what if this was the whole thing? So are we happy with that? I don't know, because I need to see it in context. Okay, let's keep going. So I'll take this and, all right, I think I want to start up here, and we're making basically a second one of these. All right, here we go. We're going around, and then we're going to come down here, and it's going to be like this. Okay, well, it's going to go, again, this part of the process, don't spend a lot of time on it. So we're going to copy this trim paths, and we're going to paste it on this fella up here. Good. Make sure that trim paths ends up in the group you want it to be in, or else you will be sad. Okay, and then that one there comes on. Okay, that's kind of okay. That's fine. Let's keep going, though, because we need to do the 6 as well, and we need to see all of these things in context. So you can always just duplicate the layer, and then you can go into this path, grab the path points, make sure that we can see our path, and then you can try to manipulate them into place if you'd like. It's one way to get about it, but let's just make sure that we draw the 6 here. And we decided that we want this to go up and over and down and around and then up, over, and curling in on itself. Okay, good. So with this series of thoughts in mind, copy this, stick it in here. Okay. I'm hitting U on the keyboard to just bring up the keyframes. All we want to do is figure out the timing. So we go whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. We can then start to think about, all right, well, that's not the timing I want at all. So what we're going to do, start it a little bit slow, and then it starts to build up speed. Maybe we'll start to pull these ones apart. Okay, good, good, good. And then maybe out in the end, we'll ease that one as well, hitting F9. How do we feel about that? Not as good. Pinch these in. Ah, lovely. I'm getting into this. Now, this is where we want to start thinking about the nuances of our motion, of how each of these, I think, is going to come on. And we're going to just massage these around until we are happy and totally fine with what's going on. If we're happy with that, then we can start to do stuff. We can go ahead and start making masks that are going to follow this little motion guide that we've created. Okay. And having this guide allows us to make more creative use of masks without having to sacrifice that kind of flexibility. So let's see here. Let's go ahead and the one that we need to start with, I think it's that blue one. Yeah, it's the blue one. So it's going to be this one right here. I love that we can combine together all of our masks, all of our paths, which is always fun. So all you have to do is click this button here. Tool creates shapes. Tool creates masks now. And now we're just going to make a little mask. Whenever you're masking out stuff like this, I really recommend you kind of go through, and we always want to make as few points as possible, just because that becomes onerous and difficult, and we want to make our lives easy. Now we want to set some keyframes on here, and we want them to follow this 8. So at this point, the mask will be totally on. So we can just go ahead into our mask, setting a keyframe here. I'm going to zoom in. It's way down at the bottom of the screen. It's not very nice, but it is down there. You gotta believe me. And we're going to kind of start tracking back a little bit. All right. So at this point, when can we start packing up some of this stuff? You can go frame by frame, but that's going to be fairly onerous. You may have to do it ultimately. The one thing you want to pay attention to is this line as it cuts across these things. And always keep in mind on your corners how those things go. So here we go. So if this is going to be cutting across here, good. Does this one make sense? Haha, nope. So here we go. Doop-a-doop-a-doo. Making sure that this all makes sense. Don't grab things by accident. All right. Now, while I have to do this fairly mundane thing here, why don't we go ahead and in the comments, let's start thinking about how we're going to deal with some of the more mundane text in this whole thing. What are we going to do about the word national? What are we going to do about the writing tutoring part? Let's try to brainstorm some ideas about that. I'd love to know specifically what kind of motion to you feels joyful and strong and a little bit weird. If you remember our brand notes that we're going back to, things need to be joyful, strong, optimistic, and a little bit weird. So keep those front of mind as we continue to kind of go through this little process here to try to move this ball forward a little bit. And at this stage, all of the points will be over here. Good. So this will start to come on. Good, good, good. That's great. Let's move this one forward. Ooh, I didn't click that button. Gotta make sure I click that button. Here we go. Do-do, 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 do. Like so. All right, now we go up here into the mask. Now what's gonna be really interesting is that this one closes up shop real quick. So that mask is gonna be like there. Now, one of the reasons that I kind of like to do things with this manual way is that I am a neat freak sometimes. I can really get into the weeds with these kinds of adjustments all day long. Like so, and here. And you'll see I'm trying to bunch the points up together, right? That's one of my things that I like to do, is to just bunch them up so they all kind of stack up a little bit. So let's look at only these two, see what kind of good job we did. I like to congratulate myself all the time. So we're going to end up with this. Whew. Doesn't that look nice as this thing snakes around? And keep in mind, we don't need to keep these colors. Why? We can change them both to the color we originally intended in here. Wouldn't you look like that? Oh, it looks so seamless. You wouldn't even know that we spent all that stuff messing around. Now, if you need to alter your timings a little bit later, you can always grab your points. Here's a little fun little tip. Hold down Alt or Option on the Mac. And usually this works pretty well to make sure that things line up. So whenever you have these kind of gaps, these kind of cuts that are going to come through, always make sure that you are keeping in mind that that may become a weird gap sometimes. So we just grab this. Shoom. We can slow things down by grabbing the points, holding Alt, and moving around. Ooh, disable preserve constant vertex. Good point there, Roland. That's definitely something we want to get into. But, let's keep moving this bad boy along. We can assume that we'll be able to roll through. That's kind of the 8, and then we'll be able to do kind of the same thing. Ooh, let me turn adaptive resolution off. For the rest of these bad boys, let's see. Should we go through that? I think we need to talk about the word national here. I think we need to do something about the word national. And I want to do something that is maybe joyful. Maybe this could be more joyful or more strong. I don't know. What do we think? I like the flourishing filigree. That feels joyful and kind of quirky to me. National. What should we do? I would like to maybe make this pop on. Let's see. Oh, what is Z Smart Design asking here? Why did I make 2 masks? Isn't it easy if you duplicate the stroked trim, increase the stroke, change to black, and make it Luma? That's an interesting move to explore. I've usually done it this way, where I've got kind of the principal artwork, and then I put a mask on top of it. If only because this technique also works when if we were dealing with, say, a bitmap image as well, which could be something that comes out of Photoshop or comes out of all stuff. Ooh, people are okay. Now we're getting all the producers in the chat. This is what I like to see. When you're here on Behance Live, we want to know what you think. So in the chat, we've got people talking about bounce in, bounce up from the bottom. Kendall, you and I are thinking the same thing. We want that kind of springy, bouncy feel out of this stuff. So with all of these things, we need to move their anchor points. Grab your anchor point pan behind tool, grab all of these things, holding down Command or Control, and just go ahead and move that down to the bottom. There are, of course, numerous scripts that can help you out with this kind of trouble. Speaking of trouble, don't give me attitude, T. All right, here we go. There we go. Get that down here on the bottom. I think middle center is where I'm going to want these. I think a little bit of rotation could be nice and playful. You know what? Here's where I sometimes run into some thoughts. Like with an N, does it make any sense that it could be rotating on the middle here? I don't think so. That part's not actually like on the ground, man. If there were a kind of ground plane under this, how could the end be rotating on it? There's nothing there. Similar with the A. Like, should the A be rotating in from over there? Let's figure it out later. So let's start by trying to put in a little bit of a scale on. I want to do it once and then copy and paste it to all the others. So let's give that a whirl. I'm not going to bog you down with expressions and stuff. If you want any of that, there's a whole channel that I've dedicated to boring people with that nonsense. But in this case, we're just going to use some nice keyframes. On the scale, let's start with the scale. Setting a keyframe on the scale, hitting the old stopwatch down here as we go. I'm holding down Shift and hitting page down, move ahead 10 frames. That's kind of a kind of my sweet spot I like to start at. And I'm just setting a keyframe there at 100. Then I dial back and bring this to 0. Okay, so with that in mind, what I want to do is now ease this, hitting F9, and we're going to go to the graph editor. Currently, we are looking at a value graph. We can look at a speed graph, but I want to look at a value graph. And I want to look at this value graph so I can start pulling these handles. And now I'm going to ease this keyframe here. We can ease keyframes in the graph editor as well. So if it is, for example, a auto Bezier or a linear, all these things, we can change them here in the graph editor. I'm going to grab this handle, pull it up above the line. And I'm just going to zoom in a little bit so we can really appreciate what this line is doing. So this line is saying we're going to go from 0 up above the ending value and then come back down. What does that look like? Boing. Boing. Isn't that fun? Look at it go. It's so bouncy, so joyful, right? That's the idea we want to get into. Now, granted, you can use a lot of things like the inertial bounce kind of expression, but I think this is nice and quick because we're up and then we're there. And do I want it to be any faster, slower? Thinking about it. I kind of want to dial this in before I start transposing this to other things. But I'm going to copy this. Let's move it ahead. Just copy that scale property, select everything else, paste it there. Boop, everything's popping on at the same time. I'm into this. We're popping off. It's popping on. It's great. Now, there are innumerable ways that we could start sequencing these things, pushing them around, making something happen. There are many scripts and expressions. If you have a favorite one, you go ahead and shout it out in the comments. I would love to know what everyone is using for their kind of automation. What I sometimes like to do is just play it simple. I just stagger them all by one frame, which, if you want a fun way to do that, we can just always, if you want to keep it vanilla, you can trim your layers to all be one long, select them in the order you'd like them to be sequenced, say from the bottom to the top, animation, keyframe assistant, sequence those layers, whoop, sequence them up, and drag them back out. This is a pretty old school way to do that, but I like talking about it anyway. And always make sure that these things go off the end. If they're meant to stick around, make them stick around. Now this is pretty nice. These things are coming on. I think I want to tighten that up. So again, we are selecting keyframes, we're holding down Alt, and then we're giving them a pull. So they all kind of come up, and they all kind of like sigh into a contented state at the end. Oh, isn't that nice? Isn't that fun? Oh boy, we had greetings from Tanzania. Well, hey, hello Tanzania. Thanks for coming out. This is fantastic. We've got people from all over the world. Turkmenistan, I see in the chat as well, all over the world. So pleased that you're coming here to Behance Live to spend some time with us. Okay, so we've got a little bit more time here. We've got national. I'm happy with how national is coming on, and we can see. Oh yes, there we go. I think what I'll do, just because I want us to have a nice kind of full look at how this thing goes, we don't need these layers anymore. Those can go away. Middle bar we will keep. These ones we will put down. What I think I'll do is I will just start duplicating. I just want to duplicate this 8, if only just so that we can have kind of a full version of how this thing might look. And duplicate that. Always end up running out of time on these things. It's important to work your way through. All right, here we go. And now that these are completed, I'm going to make those 826, and that can hang out. 888. I don't like that at all. We'll come back to that. So we've got our 8s, we've got our national. We need to do something with the rest of these. Oh, Netherlands here. Let's see. Oh, Slovenia. Oh my goodness, so many people in the chat. I'm loving it. Let's try to do something with writing, publishing, and tutoring, because I think those need to come on, and they need to be faster than the existing things. We are doing some write-on stuff on the timing of these. Let's get national coming in later. Oh, that's going to be good. I'm happy with this. Now we need to go... Let's come back to that. We said one of the main things that we wanted to do was to integrate some of their core values in here. How are we going to do that? Two of them I want to point to specifically that kind of inspired my thoughts. I love this Venn diagram of these two things coming together, and I also enjoy this line coming around full circle because we have both of those elements kind of present here as well. So let me just make sure that everything is parented so that when I start rescaling this stuff, there we go. That looks nice. When I start rescaling this stuff, it starts to make a little bit of sense. Let's go ahead and take, for example, let's take, where is my big red circle back here? All right. If we want this thing to kind of Venn diagram in, and we want this to behave like a Venn diagram, we're going to need two of these. So let's go ahead and duplicate this thing. Wonderful. This is the resting state we want to end at. And let's see, let's just solo these so that we can work on only those. All right. And let's go ahead and set keyframes on their position. I hit P to call that up. Let's go ahead, maybe 20 frames, set keyframes here. And what we want to do is move these two things apart. And how much do we want to move them apart? Not totally sure yet. But I like to bring up a little proportional grid. Oh yeah, we're just kind of outside that. Let's see if they're going to intersect in the middle. Maybe they can start here. Okay. What I'm doing is I'm holding down Shift and giving these things a bump. I like things to work in even spaces because I am a bit of a nut sometimes. And these things are now merging together as they move in. Cool. Let's go ahead and ease that. Let's look at their speed graph. We don't really need that reference graph up here. I'm just going to grab this, squish it like so. So it kind of comes together. Now these things themselves probably shouldn't hang out like that. Let's go ahead and deal with their opacities a little. Even though I'm loath to do things with opacity, I will be honest. But we can kind of bring it on like it's coming into focus. Is that what we want? Thinking about it. Let's see. Maybe they resolve kind of at the same time. It's kind of a fun feel to it. A little bit. One thing that I kind of dislike is that there is kind of this ramp up that happens, right? That, yeah, James Bond vibes, exactly, which I would not describe as a joyful franchise. A strong franchise, certainly, but maybe a little joyless at times. So let's see. I find that the ramp up here is a little bit much because when you're adding opacity to each other, it's not like 1 + 1, sometimes like 1 × 1, and kind of understanding that is a little bit important. Now we could say, oh, I know, well, we'll just go ahead and use like the use the alpha add mode. Now the inside is darker than the outside, and we're at full opacity. Probably a bit too early, right? Let's. Ooh. You know what? I'm actually kind of into this. That is now working out. Though it does kind of feel like we've been knocked in the head and it's starting to resolve itself a little bit. Something else that can be fun to do is to, rather than deal with two things overlapping with opacity, we can do things like we can deal with them a little bit more abstractly. We can have, say, one of them be the alpha mat of the other. Now it's more like this thing is kind of expanding up from the middle. That kind of, that kind of feels more fun than before. Now it feels kind of like a balloon. And balloons are the most joyful thing in the world. So you can go with that. I'm happy with that. And that's just by using, we're using 1 as the, as the alpha mat here in the track mat. So we're able to link those things together. So how we doing? I think we need to adjust some timings. Let's get these green things coming in first. That's pretty close. Yeah. Feeling this, feeling this. Good. So let's see, what else can we do? Now that I'm seeing it, now that I'm seeing how things are going, this little element here, not really much to do here. I think we'll just keyframe this path. So we'll go here, move this ahead, and we'll start it off. Here we go. Hitting the keyboard. Maybe that produces some good ASMR. I don't know, but we'll just adjust our graph like this. Ooh, now that is having a nice relaxing effect on me. Okay, so I'll dial it back a little bit because we are running a little bit out of time. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to not look at these for now. And see what we can solve while we're here. Let's solve this bad boy up here, the outer circle. Let's add a trim paths, add trim paths. We're coming into the finish line, folks. And of course, I'm going to do like so. One thing that is nice to do with your trim paths, while it is nice to have them kind of explode on and then kind of slowly go around, because of the thinness of this line, it's not super enjoyable to see it kind of burst into the scene like that. But something that can help you smooth that out, and let me remove those proportion grids so we can enjoy it, is to go ahead and use the offset as well, or a rotation at the same time. So let's say we just take this and we rotate it like 90 as we're going on. So they kind of meet up. So there's a little bit of extra motion as it's going. That can be a little bit helpful. So that's right. The A in SMO in ASMR is, stands for Adobe Live. Sensory Meridian Response. Okay. So we've got this thing going on, and one of the things that we talked about a little bit is that we need this to work in inverted or on top of things as an overlay. So what can be useful is to, rather than working with colors, is to simply think of it all as positive and negative space. So what we would do is go back to that brand guide and have a look at the positive and negative spaces. Oh, and I'm going to stop using my scroll wheel to do this. Here we go. So we need white on the outside, white on the inside. Good. So this thing, these backgrounds here, these are going to be bright. Yes. That means that the 826, the 8s of 826 will be black. Good. This thing here, if you want things to simply be filled in, you can always apply a fill to them. 8, 2, boom, good. Like this. And now we will take, finally, where were you? Outer circle. You're going to be white as well. Fun. Okay. So we've got this situation going on. If we turn the black background on, we get this. You know what? Let's make this look more like their basic logo. There we go. I'm happy with that. We don't need this. Let's get that middle bar out of there. So this thing's coming on. It's working out. The last tip I'm going to do just before we sign off, because we do have to get going, our day is winding down, we can take this basic logo, we can put it in a new composition, and then we can use things like tint. We can use tint on it to change it to all kinds of colors that we might desire, or you can use it in different blending modes to go over top of footage. Anyway, we're here at the end, so I must leave you. Thank you so much for coming on to the program, and hopefully we see you next week as we continue this kind of thing. Thanks again, and have a great day.